right, so today I'm very excited. We have got Norm Stockton with us on the podcast. Welcome, Norm.
Good to be here, Brent. Thank you.
Great, great. Yeah, and I want to real quickly. I just want to tell you how I came about learning about you. Actually, about 12 or 13 years ago, I became saved, and I figured, well, I'm a musician. I should probably be listening to some, Christian music now. So on Spotify, and Spotify decided that one of the early Christian albums that I should listen to was actually the Lincoln Brewster album, "Today Is the Day."
Oh yeah.
And I was up at that point, I just thought, oh, Christian music, this is probably going to be, watered down poppy stuff, and not going to sound very good. But that album just made me realize, wow, there's some really cool Christian music out there. And that kind of became like anytime I would be talking to my non-Christian friends and I'd say, you got to listen to Christian music. They're like, no. And I'm like, oh, you gotta check out this album. And particular, the last cut on the album is definitely a favorite. That's a really good rocker to share with non-Christian friends. But also, of course, knew about you because being that I love MTD basses, I know that you've got the MTD signature model. And then also online, it seems like anytime I'm in bass forums, I always hear your name come up, whether it's people saying, oh, you got to check this bass player out, or I've learned from this guy, I did some training with them and whatnot. And then when I was doing prep for the podcast, I really realized just how much there is to you. And I didn't realize you also have three solo albums out, which are really, really impressive. I've been listening to them a lot all week long, and I think more people need to hear them. And then you've also got like your online video series, the Grooves and Sushi. You've got the all the training stuff that I've been learning about that's really cool in the academy and all that. So,
You
um,
can't me, I guess.
yeah. So,
Sorry.
but yeah, I mean, it's like so much cool stuff that we can talk about. But I guess the first thing I have to ask is probably the question you always get asked at the beginning of every podcast interview or any other kind of interview, and that's, of course, tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got involved with playing bass and kind of got to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I was born and raised in Japan. I'm half Japanese. My mom's
Okay.
Japanese. And I lived there for 10 years, moved to Hawaii for 5 years, and then moved back to Japan to graduate from high school. And then I moved to
Oh, wow.
California and have been in California ever since. Uh, I've been in Southern California the whole time. But yeah, the bass thing came along. I'm the youngest of three, and my older brother and older sister were both prodigy level classical guitar player and classical piano player as players as kids, and I was not, and I was totally intimidated by that. It's like I don't want to try to compete with that. Not that it's a competition, but as a kid,
Yeah.
can't help get away from that. And so uh, it wasn't until I was in high school and I was with some a friend group that was really into the Beatles, and I'm not quite that old. I was into the Beatles when a lot of other people my age weren't, and but I one day took a couple strings off an old acoustic guitar that was in the house and started playing some of the Beatles lines, Paul McCartney, amazing lines. I think the first one was a song called "Should Have Known Better," and my technique kind of goes hand in hand with that lyric.
Mhm.
It was pretty terrible technique, but yeah, that was that the bug bit hard with that, and pretty soon I was, I bought my first bass, and a friend of mine turned me on. He gave me a cassette. I'm dating myself now here a little bit, but he gave me a cassette uh, with Rush, and that was the
Ah, nice.
beginning of my, becoming a more or less a disciple of Geddy Lee for like 8 years or something, and
Okay.
that's kind of how I got into bass.
Okay, cool, cool. And so, so your first guitar then was, your bass guitar was actually an acoustic guitar. It wasn't
It
actually a
was
bass that you're pretending to play as a bass.
exactly.
That's funny. Well, what was then your first actual bass that you owned?
Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible. It was, yeah. I lived on well, I didn't. I lived off base, but my dad was a civilian working for the Navy, and so we were. The town was called Yokosuka, Japan, and
Okay.
on the base they had the Navy Exchange that had these terrible sort of entry level musical instruments, and one of them was a bass guitar. Looking back now, it was like a short scale. It was sort of a hybrid looking thing that had elements of P bass, elements of J bass, not as cool as either. And the strings looked like they had some sort of like aluminum foil wrap or something. I don't know if they were trying to do a flat wound thing or not, but suffice it to say that it was pretty terrible. But I, along with music, which I was really getting into at that time. Actually, before I was even into music, I was really into sailing. Those are the two big pastimes in my life.
Did you say sailing?
Sailing. I still sail.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I have a boat in San Diego. And so where that comes in, though, is that I sold my sailboat to buy my first good bass, which was an Aria SB1000. I don't know if you remember those, but at the time that was a pretty hot bass. And yeah, once that I got that, then it's like, oh, okay, now I understand why people don't play this other one that I had.
Yeah, so that would have been what, around maybe early 80s if it was an Aria?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, and so then I mean, I guess what was your early experiences like? Were you playing in bands and stuff like that, and then got into, working with other musicians, or kind of how did you kind of transition from playing the bass to then becoming an instructor and then working with other musicians?
That's a longer story. The abbreviated version of that is that so I was playing with a high school buddy. He played guitar, and the youth center was right across the street from the high school that I went to on the bass. And there was a guitar player, and we do like blues jams, And in short order, I actually got together with some musicians that were all sailors. They were in the Navy, and I was the only high school kid in the band. But they were all quite good players, and so that was my first actual band. But yeah, then I ended up after graduation, I moved to San Diego to go to school, and I was young and dumb, and young, not dumb. I was both. And I joined a band, and I thought, hey, we're going to make it big. I don't need the schooling, And so after a year at San Diego State, I dropped out, and God is a redeeming God, though. And it's pretty cool that, or I don't know if it's cool or if it's just hilarious and God's sense of humor, but I've been adjunct faculty at a bunch of universities over the years. I teach at Biola University in LA, and every time people call me for that, I'm like, well, I don't have any schooling, and oh yeah, but you're out there doing it. It's fine, So, but yeah, I got into the teaching thing. The shorter version of that, not that I'm abbreviating these as much as I probably should, but you can edit it. I was living in San Diego for many years, and I would compete in these, occasionally they'd have this music store at the time would have these guitar competitions. And I one time asked them, hey, what can a bass player enter, and what are the prizes? And, you could win gear. And I thought, well, this is a kind of a cool thing. I could win some gear maybe, and then sell it. And I would have made a little bit of profit and be able to afford some more equipment. And so I did that a few times, and by God's grace, I did quite well. And so but one time there was somebody who saw me at that competition, and he asked if I teached or taught. And I remember kind of thinking, well, I haven't yet, but he was really persistent, and I feel like God used him to sort of get me into the whole teaching thing, which I never really set out to be this educational kind of guy. Years later, I kind of realized that I love it, and it's a really fulfilling aspect of what I do. But again, that was God sort of opening doors, and I'm kind of like hoity-toing my way along, going, oh, I guess I could do that, And but yeah, teaching has been a big part of what I do.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you mentioned Paul McCartney as an early influence. What would be some of the other people that kind of influenced you along the way as a bass player?
In those days, it was all prog guys. So Dave Hope from King, certainly I listened to the daylights out of them. Getty.
Getty.
Listened to, wow, I guess they're all Canadian trios. There's called Triumph I really liked.
Yes, I remember them.
Levine was the bass player there. But yeah, and then years later, I saw a couple of life-changing concerts, and it totally changed my musical trajectory. And I've been playing rock since then, but for a while, I totally became this snob, and I was not into rock at all. I was only listening to people like Marcus Miller and Victor Wooten and John Patitucci and all of those guys. Um, since then, I got back into rock and started working with Lincoln Brewster and people like that. But so I would say that if it's good, I really like it. And
Yeah.
anybody playing, I definitely have a passion for groove oriented playing, really solid ensemble stuff.
Hmm.
That's not to say that I don't enjoy the pyrotechnic aspect of it, but if it's an either or, I'll take the groove part of it any day.
Yeah.
That's much more where my heart is. But bass players being who we are, we like to hear people doing gymnastics on bass once in a while too. So I'm always trying to make those gymnastics as musical as possible.
Yeah, yeah, and you talk about the different styles and stuff that you're into. You kind of had some seasons you went through where you like certain things, but now you pretty much like everything. And I definitely think that shows on your solo material, which definitely has. I mean, I hear rock on it. I hear jazz, fusion. I hear some other experimental stuff. I hear a lot of, definitely a lot of groove-based stuff. So you're definitely like fusion fusioning a lot of different styles together on your solo stuff.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely that's the stuff that I find interesting. And I have also one of the things I actually talk to my students about this a lot. One of the things that I really discovered in the last I don't know 15, 20 years is that uh, the music that tends to stay the music that I love and the music that tends to stay on my playlist is the stuff that moves my heart and not just my mind.
Hmm.
And, I can hear something where it's like, wow, this band is amazingly tight, and boy, they're fast, and they're playing all these odd time signatures, and wow, that's impressive. After a couple of listens, I find myself kind of going, okay, that was fun, but the stuff that stays on my playlist is the stuff that moves my heart as well. It
Hmm.
makes me want to jump up and down and scream or cry or you praise God or anything that moves my heart as well. And so that's also been even beyond the style. I think there's a musical style is a language, like
Hmm.
Victor, and I totally agree. And I think that you can. I think there's so much incredible music out there that you're really selling yourself short if you don't listen to and try to see the beauty in this enormously broad range of music and the creativity that God's given people, as musicians and having created music in the first place. And so I guess my goal with any of my albums, aside from just making them diverse in terms of genres, is also probably more than anything is to have it move people's hearts as well.
Hmm.
And so for me, one of the biggest compliments I ever get is when people say, "Hey, I got your albums and I love them, and my wife also loves them." It's like, okay, I've succeeded in making something that's actually art. Not to say that the wife can't be a muso as well, but a lot of times these people are. Yeah, my wife doesn't play bass and she's not really into bass, but she really likes that song that you played with the trumpet or whatever, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And you have a diverse group of people that's playing. I don't know how consistent it is from album to album. I know when I was watching, the the Grooves and Sushi video series you had. I remember one of the names I remember was Greg Bissonette, who I remember being a child of growing up in the 80s and MTV. I remember him from playing with David Lee Roth. And then you've got
yeah.
the trumpet player, which, definitely has a more, jazz, Miles Davis kind of sound. And so, I mean, tell us about some of the musicians that you've got working with you on these albums.
Yeah, I am so humbled and honored that these people are, aside from just being, you know, iconic musicians, they've become friends of mine. Yeah, Greg Bissonette, I met him many years ago we were both teaching at a conference, Christian Musician Summit, actually up in
Hmm.
Seattle area. And
Is he a Christian, by the way? Oh,
yeah,
okay. Wow.
great. And so he played on my second album as well as Grooves and Sushi. By the way, if for any of your listeners who maybe or is this listening or viewing or whatever it is,
Both.
uh,
We'll have two different versions.
uh, if you're not familiar, Grooves and Sushi, aside from being my third solo album, is also a web series. And if anybody has seen Live from Daryl's House, it's essentially a sushi-based instrumental music version of Live from Daryl's House. So, it came time to do my third record, and I was thinking, it'd be really cool to be able to track this at my house. And so we did a kind of concept thing at my house, and to see if we could get decent drum sounds in my living room. So we cleared the living room, put drums in there, and listen. It's like, wow, the drums sound great in this room. So we ended up deciding that we're going to track this album in my house. And the thought occurred to me, well, if we're going to all be there tracking this live, how much more trouble would it be just to have a film crew there to capture the video part of it? And then we would have, it could be a video thing as well. And the answer to that question is it's exponentially more difficult. It's so much more work. And I didn't realize that until I was already too far in. But, looking back on it now, it was a ton of work, but it was really fun to be able to see the actual takes of these musicians. These solos were not overdubbed. They were done in the moment. Mm-hmm. And you have people like Greg Bissonette or Chris Coleman, who plays with Prince and Beck, or Zorro, who plays with Lenny Kravitz. It was a really interesting group of musicians. Mark Lettieri from Snarky Puppy, Brian Willett from One Republic, which you don't as an instrumental kind of musician. He's more of a pop, amazing keyboard synth guy, textures and the whole thing. But bottom line is that these people with Grooves and Sushi, we did 4 different video shoots with 3 songs each that had never been played before. And the ensemble that I assembled for each of the 4 shoots was different. And they were people that we had never played together as that group. There were a couple of people that I had worked with in the past, but that ensemble had never played before. And we were playing music that had never been played. And pretty much from once we got, okay, line check. Okay, yeah, is that level good? Okay. We were already recording and shooting, we did multiple, and, but testament to the mad skills of each of these musicians. We were getting some pretty flabbergasting performances right off the bat, and so, yeah, it was, and it's really fun to hear. I'm sitting there in the moment, and I've only heard these songs in my head and kind of really, mediocre demos of them. And so to actually hear the artistry coming together with, things that are surprises that are kind of being thrown, because I provide a basic rhythm chart with, some of the head melodies and things, but there's a lot of interpretation that's happening. And each of these musicians just knocked it out of the park. Is really, if anybody is a fan of sort of instrumental music, of the type that you've been describing, they should definitely go check that out. It's all on YouTube.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. And so I assume you were mentioning having the parts and stuff that you're sharing. So you wrote all the songs and had the arrangements worked out for all the musicians, and then they interpret it on the spot, improvised as needed.
Yeah. So I'm giving, that's a fine art, and I always capture, if you put too much detail on a chart, most musicians are going to start getting buried in the chart.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I need to make sure I don't miss anything, and so the art is to provide enough information, but not too much information.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, everybody came in having done their homework, so they kind of knew the basic vibe of what we were going for. But there was definitely sort of spontaneous composition happening with each of the musicians, and responding to each other and the whole thing.
Yeah, ranging, that was my major in college. So
Oh,
it's something that's really, I that's a topic I could definitely would love to talk further on. But so yeah, that's why I'm really interested in how you kind of put all that together. And I'm assuming like with the charts, you probably had some sections where you had specific hits and things like that where they needed to be on, and then other areas where you're just like, here's the chords, just do whatever.
precisely.
Yeah, cool. Okay. And then on the, when you're talking about the production being so much more advanced than you thought it was going to be with the cameras and stuff, because it's definitely it was cool when watching and that, you're hearing the band play the song, and then that's interspersed with them talking about the song or talking about different things that relate to what you guys were just playing, as well as some other fun kind of stories and stuff like that. So it definitely must have took a lot of time to put all together. Were you involved with that, or did you have like a crew that handled all the editing as well as the photography?
I did all the video editing,
Oh, did you?
and
Okay.
so that was one. I'm sitting here in my studio. Right here is my Final Cut rig, and then right behind me is my Pro Tools rig.
Okay.
I had a very talented engineer, Mike Harris, who did all the tracking,
Hmm.
and 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 then I did some comping. We didn't have enough cameras to capture everything in one take, so there is, you know, we got multiple angles, but that was one of the big challenges. Was this is instrumental music. When we cut to the solo, what happens when the guitar player's solo in the third pass was the keeper, but the keyboard player's solo in the second pass was the keeper?
Hmm.
If I don't have that take, it's this kind of music, it's not going to work to just show them and their fingers are doing something different, right? So
Yeah.
pre-comping decision that I made, which I figured, with limited cameras, it's like, okay, it's not cheating too much to grab the piano player's third take for the solo versus the guitar player's second take. That's that we did record this in the moment. So I did some comping, but with every comping decision, it's like, do I have that shot? And so it's this three-dimensional chess. It's like, okay, I want to make this move, go to the Final Cut rig to see if any of the four cameras captured. How was that other solo? And so yeah, uh, it was. I I guess the silver lining was that I have not been doing video editing for 30 years like I have been doing audio and audio editing. And so for me, I still actually kind of enjoy video editing. There's something about, when you do an edit and then you hit play and you see it worked. It's like, oh, that looks good. There's something kind of gratifying about it, where with audio editing, it's kind of like, kill me now. And so yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was also kind of rewarding work. I'm happy with the way it turned out, and people seem to really enjoy watching it. So it was cool. But yeah,
Yeah.
if there is a season two, there's 12 episodes online right now. But if there is a season two, I will probably seriously look at hiring a video editor. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you did a great job. It's really professional work there, so I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the kind of switch back a little bit to your teaching and stuff. Because you got a ton of, I mean, just a ton of material online and on your website, normstockton.com. Tell us about, it seems like some of it is some older material, and then some of it's newer. Kind of break down a little bit about kind of what's all available and what people should check out.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the late 90s, I was traveling around North America with a company called Maranatha Music.
Okay.
And we were doing training events for churches. And at that time, that was kind of a new concept. And I was regularly having people say, man, if you could hang out for an extra couple of days, it'd be so cool. I'd really like to continue to learn. And that was never really practical. But I remember thinking, if I could hang out for an extra couple of days, what would I share with this person? And that ended up being the first two volumes of the Groovy for Heaven videos. At the time, they were VHS tapes, and uh, and then those ended up doing really surprisingly well. They even were kind of accepted in the mainstream, even though they were really geared towards players in the church. And so a couple of years later, volumes 3 and 4 came out, and they it's the whole thing is about 7 hours ish of material that kind of goes from the very beginning of, hey, this is, how you hold the bass, et cetera, all the way to, the 4th volume has all the solo stuff, so people that had heard my albums were saying, well, where's the one that shows the double thumbing and the chording and artificial harmonics and all that? So I always tell people that volume 4 is the one that'll get you fired if your ensemble skills aren't together, but volumes 1 through 3 are really rhythm section, how to function as a bass player effectively in a rhythm section, how to work with drums and the whole thing.
Okay.
But so those all came out years and years ago. Strangely, the fashions have changed a little bit. One of the videos I always tell people, hey, when you watch this, just keep in mind that sweater vests were in style when I shot. But other than some of the style stuff, that's kind of, it's styles have changed a little bit, but the concepts still are completely relevant today. So it's so that's the 4-volume Group for Heaven videos have been out for years, and they've been distributed all over the world. It's been pretty humbling to see. Back in the early 2010s, I started working on an instructional website called Art of Groove, and I was really just trying to, the in-person teaching thing is, I enjoy it. I enjoy human interaction, but it's kind of this is going to sound really very callous, but it's sort of an inefficient way to get educational information out there, because it's one person at a time, and I'm devoting an hour of my time for this one person, and I still do that. But I was thinking, if I can provide online education, and it's using the curriculum that I use for private teaching, but this person can study at their own pace, and it would cost a fraction of what I charge for in-person lessons. I thought that is probably a better way to go, Mm-hmm. And so Art of Groove was launched in 2012, and I've had students from all over the world, and I'm actually in the process of kind of doing a whole bunch of new material for it. I got sort of derailed this last year, after kind of in the middle of it, but I'm going to be restarting that soon. But suffice to say that the website is definitely, I think it's one of the best deals going in music education. It's less than $10 a month, and the idea is I definitely, there's part of it. As a business guy, I think I'm not smart about it, because from a business standpoint and a marketing standpoint, probably I'm lowering the perceived value by not charging more. But I've always wanted to make it where economics are not going to preclude somebody from growing musically. So I've been really resistant to upping the price, but it's a good deal.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's subscription based, and people $10 a month, as long as they've subscribed, they can access all of the content that you have on there.
Exactly. And people can buy certain courses and have lifetime access to them.
Okay.
But certainly having access to the whole library is kind of that's probably the best deal. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I've heard a lot, like I said, your name's come up, and your training stuff has come up so often online on forums when I'm talking to people. So I'm definitely going to assume that that there's some good information there. And so I'll definitely, would recommend that my listeners check out your training stuff. Definitely if they are wanting to grow as a bass player. And Okay, so as a bass instructor, let me ask you, what would you say is probably the single worst piece of advice you ever heard a bass instructor actually tell somebody that you have to come back and go, whoa, let me correct that.
That is a great question. And I don't want to say anything controversial, so I may need to answer this very broadly. Um, there's a very respected bass player who will definitely remain nameless for this purpose, but he is a strong advocate against using a metronome.
Mhm.
And uh, I I take great. I have a big issue with that because I know how helpful that was for me.
Mhm.
I've been playing for many years, and one of the things I'm always trying to help people learn from me, whether it's a clinic or in lessons, I'm always trying to help people learn things less painfully than the way I did. I learned lots of life lessons and music lessons the hard way, and the whole thing of groove and timekeeping and rhythmic solidity, that was something that as a prog guy, and I'm not saying that the guys that influenced me didn't have good time. I'm saying that with my focus on that style of music, it was mostly my attention was mostly on the chops and how fast you could play and and licks. And I found myself in a recording studio after I had been playing for about 10 years or so. I knew how to play the bass. And after a couple of passes, the producer hit the talkback mic and said, "Hey, it doesn't sound like you're playing that well to the click track. Let me turn it up for you. Like that was the problem." And I barely survived that session, but that was one of the most helpful things to ever happen to me on a musical level because that day my paradigm changed, and it wasn't about the bass guitar and all the licks you could play, even though I think the bass is an amazing instrument for all sorts of different melodic and harmonic things. But if the rhythmic aspect's not happening, nobody's going to give you an
Yeah.
opportunity to demonstrate anything else. And so that day, my paradigm changed from bass guitar with emphasis on the guitar to bass as part of the drum kit. I'm trying to make it where the bass and the drums are a unit coming at you as a listener. And there's, where if you close your eyes, it's kind of difficult to tell where one leaves off and the other begins, vice versa. And I know that working with a metronome was a huge part of that. And that's not to say that metronomes are great for groove. I think you could make an argument that, some of the best grooves are not metronomic because there's a humanity to it.
Hmm.
However, what metronomes do is they help calibrate
Yes.
one's internal sense of time. And you
Yes.
aware of your natural time tendencies, like, wow, when I'm playing with the click track, every 8 measures when I'm filling into that next section, it sounds like the metronome's slowing down. Well, the metronome's probably not slowing down, right? It's probably
Hmm.
tending to rush your fills.
Yeah. And
Don't
I'm looking, I've got mine right here.
Oh, you actually have a metronome. Oh, yeah.
Yep. So it's
Hard.
always nearby. I grew up playing to a metronome because I actually started out as a classical pianist as a kid. So I'm very used to playing with a metronome. And the very point that you were making, I always tend to make with other people is that you got to have that internal groove. So you got to have that internal beat. Like you were just saying, the metronome helps you to establish that. You don't have to live and die by it, but if you can use this to help, like you said, calibrate it, which is a great way of mentioning that. And so, yeah, it's
Yeah, turn the metronome off. You're not going to sound like a machine, but yeah, it gets you in the ballpark, I think, is the deal.
yeah,
And frankly, you know, the other really practical part of it is if you can't play with a click in today's music world, that's a problem. You're going
oh
to
yeah,
really limit the number of opportunities you have. So you have to be able to play with a click as well. So that's probably the one thing that I probably heard other bad bits of advice, but that's the one where I'm like, well, I'm sort of like in my own I've actually lived that, and I know that that practicing with a metronome is not a detrimental thing to your musical development. So
yeah.
yeah.
I would say that the if you have to have a metronome in order to play in time, then it's a problem.
Right.
But using it to calibrate your timing, then it's a good thing.
Yeah, there's a drummer friend of mine. Actually, I've been sounding like I'm name dropping. I'm not, but his name's Drew Hester. He did some stuff with the Foo Fighters, and I think he's playing with
Hmm.
Steve. But my favorite quote of his is, you know, somebody asked him if he could play with a click, and he said, "Yes, I can. But even more importantly, I could play without a click." It's like, yeah, that's true.
Yep, that's it right there. Well, let's see here. I would say, okay, so now we talked about that, but what would then be a technique or a concept that you wished more bass players would focus on that maybe that you kind of universally maybe you see that they're not?
You know, I don't know that. I think, if anything, um, I'm regularly surprised with my students at the university who come in and their influences are groove oriented people, and it's not that they're not they don't have chops, but they're definitely people like Joe Dar, who's
Hmm.
definitely, um, he's got good time and he definitely is about the groove. Um, I think, if anything, and I'm going to sound like an old guy with this, and I'm not intending to disparage anybody. I think I'm guilty of the same thing because of the 4-second attention span of the public now with social media.
Hmm.
It's just the reality. And so, as a matter of fact, the only clip I've ever done on Instagram that went like legit viral, it's like it been viewed like 2 million times or something, is a little excerpt from a song tutorial of mine. And I'm doing this double thumbing thing. And, you know, it's ideally suited to the 4-second attention span. I had, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of people commented on that video. And there were definitely some people that are like, yeah, this guy's never going to get a gig. He can't, you don't get hired to do this kind of stuff. It's like, and I responded, hey, I totally get it. And uh, this constitutes about 0.5% of the playing that I do. 99.5% of the time, I'm playing ensemble bass. I am all about the groove, and but I think there's, in today's world, uh, you have to kind of constantly remind newer players that, yeah, there's the kind of playing that gets you views on social media, and I don't fault anybody for wanting to get views on social media. I mean, it's a necessary aspect of one's career if you're wanting to do music vocationally. You
Hmm.
have to do that, right? But just recognize that that's not the thing that gets people to hire you.
Yeah.
What to hire you is when you can play the right bass line for the song that supports the vocal, doesn't get in the way, but supports it and helps the song say what the song needs to say. It helps the song feel the way and convey the emotion that the song is trying to convey, conveys the lyric. And if you can do that with good, tone and phrasing, and you can show up on time and you have gear that works and you're a nice guy and, a fun hang, that's what's going to get you gigs. You know,
Hmm.
you a lot of people that you see on social media, now maybe they can do that. They don't get an opportunity to demonstrate that on social media, because if you start playing a simple solid groove, people will watch the first 3 seconds of it and then they'll move on.
Yeah.
So if it get no views, it'll get no traction. But I make a big point, especially with my younger players who are wanting to go into music full time. It's like, hey, don't get duped into thinking that if you can make a 30-second thing that blows people's minds, that'll constitute a career. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that right there in my life is the 2 minutes a night that Lincoln walks off stage and says, Norm, do your thing, and I, like I said earlier, I think I love all the different things you could do with a bass guitar, and I think it's a beautiful instrument for those things. But if the ensemble part of it isn't happening, then nobody's going to give you an opportunity to do anything else, and you'll have a really tough time making a living for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, you mentioned, like, when Lincoln, gives you the 2 minutes or whatever. Real quickly, just tell us a little bit, like, for example, what it's like just in general playing with an artist like Lincoln.
Well, yeah, I've been playing with him since I think my first time playing with him was 2003, but I joined his band in late 2005, early 2006, I think. And I'm still actually, we do Christmas shows, and I think I'm going to be in Michigan with him in a couple months. But, I kind of came off the road in 2012 and started just doing more, just occasional stuff, but I wasn't in his regular touring
Hmm.
band. And, but he and I are, great friends. And so it involves tons of laughter. And, we both have a great deal of respect for each other, and it's fun. It's
Yeah.
certainly hard work. Um, it's funny. You were mentioning today is the day. When I live in Orange County, and he lives in Northern California, up near Sacramento, and so he's about an hour flight north of me. And today is the day I was. I It wasn't credited until he actually told me many years later. He's like, I always felt badly I didn't credit you as a co-producer of that record, because that's exactly what you were. But suffice to say, I was kind of functioning as a co-producer, and I was there a ton. And to the extent that his college age son now, um, very recently, like within the last 2 3 years, was talking to his folks, and he's like, it was during the time that like Norm was living here, and they're like, Norm's never lived here. He's like, no, no, no. Remember, he during the album is like, I was there so much that his son thought I lived there. I think within like a 60-day period, I was there like over 50 days.
Wow.
So it's, I mean, it was fun, but it was, man, we put in some hours doing that. So it's not, uh, I think there's certainly been tons of work, and it's difficult work sometimes, but it helps when you enjoy the people that you're working with. And you know it's not lost on me that it's a it's quite a gift, that God's given me the opportunity to make a living doing what I love.
Yeah.
So I work very hard to make sure that I don't take that for granted.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, is it you obviously playing out a lot on a lot of gigs? Any kind of funny experience or one of those types? Every musician's got that one gig or that one performance where they go, "Oh gosh, I got a story about this one." Anything like that you got?
Oh, there's a bunch. Yeah. I think one that I think I might have even shared it in Grooves and Sushi. By the way, jumping back, yeah, what Brent is talking about is that interspersed in the Grooves and Sushi episodes, between song, sections of the song performances, I had a sushi chef come to my house, and so after we tracked, all the musicians are gathered around the island in my kitchen, and we're eating the sushi and telling road stories and kind of sharing some funny, whether it's funny or inspiring or whatever. There's really, the conversations were maybe my favorite part of the whole thing. It was really great.
Yeah.
But in one of the sushi hangs, where was I going with? Oh yeah, I shared it in one of the sushi hangs that so we were doing this festival in I think it was South Dakota, maybe. A huge festival, maybe one of the biggest crowds I've ever played to. It was something like 80,000 maybe. And we the keyboard player in the band at the time had put together, he was sort of doing the social media thing for the band, and so he had kind of put together some clips of just road shots, B-roll type stuff, and just kind of giving people an idea of what it was like, as we were on this run. And he had put one of Lincoln's songs called "All to You" as the bed music. Well, as video editors do, it's like, well, okay, I need another 20 seconds of music, so I'm going to grab this section and put it here. And so the song form changed because he's kind of just making it work for that. Well, I had watched that maybe. There was something about it that was really fun to watch, and I think there was something funny about it with the drummer as well. So as a band, we even had watched this video clip, this YouTube clip, a bunch of times. I didn't realize that my brain was starting to get used to hearing the song that way. We're playing All to You to this crowd of 80,000 people, and I go right into this chorus section when it's supposed to go back into a verse. Mm. And that happens in that context, at least for me. If you would ask me what my name is, I would have had a tough time answering your question. It was like, unbelievable. Wait, where am I? Who am I? What's going on? And you just start panicking. You're like, okay, hold it together. You got to hold it together. You got to finish the song, And so I made a point at that on that day that I was not going to ever listen to any of these songs edited any other way than the way that I know. Because in Lincoln's band, I mean, as is mostly the case when, you don't have iPads and charts on stage, you're not reading this stuff. You have. And so when it's down to memory, you don't want anything clouding your memory.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had gear failures where, we've been at a big ballpark and, we're getting ready to start and the house lights go off and Lincoln's amp is not working. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lincoln Brewster. It's like the crowd's, and then it kind of dies down and it's about like that. And you're like, oh. So we've had a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. Well, let's talk real quickly about your bass, because like I had mentioned, I am also a MTD Saratoga player myself, but mine's the Kingston version.
Yeah.
And you've got the American version that you've had for a few years now, but I believe it's later this year you're coming out with a Kingston version of your model. Is that correct?
Yeah, MTD is for sure.
Yeah.
I'm blown away. This right here is my hand-built American version. This is the main bass that I play these days, and it's a phenomenal instrument. When I do clinics, I regularly have people saying, oh man, I really love how that bass sounds and it looks great. And, how do I get one? And I tell them what it costs and you just see the bass drop, and the irony of the whole thing is that, to be perfectly candid, I can't afford my bass. I mean, there are people that can afford an $8,000 instrument. I'm not one of them, and so I'm very grateful that I don't have to pay $8,000 for this. But that's, for years, I've really been interested in a Kingston version of this bass coming out. Something that's really great, but is going to be less money. Where you don't need to be an attorney or an MD or something in order to afford it. And it had been in talks for probably 6 years, maybe even 7 years. And it had actually gotten the green light at the NAMM show in 2020. January of 2020, it got the green light. And 2 months later, the lockdown happened, and everything came to a grinding halt. And so I kind of had let it go. And it's like, yeah, this is, that ship sailed. And early in 2024, Michael said, hey, I think we should do the NS Kingston, and so the final prototype was sent to me, and I played it. I'm looking at it right here, but it's not in the camera shot. Here we go. This is the Kingston version.
Okay.
And, matching headstock, the whole thing, But it's the final version was shipped to me right before NAMM of 2025, and I had high expectations and high hopes for it. It blew them away. It's much better than I thought it was going to be, or that I hoped it was going to be. And it's kind of the American hand-built version. By the way, there's a video on YouTube that's a making of video of the hand-built American one. and it goes through some of my tones as well. But it kind of goes from the selection of woods to the final setup. It kind of documents the process, and if you've you know even if you're not interested in getting an MTD, I mean, I think it's really pretty amazing to see the amount of work that goes into the hand-built American.
I actually watched that video, and that at the beginning it looked like it's out of like a shed in the backyard or something like that where they're building them.
Yeah, their workshop is on their residential property
Wow.
in Kingston, New York. Yeah,
Huh.
and it's a colossal amount of work. But what when we were when I got the first prototype of the Kingston, without getting too into the details, but I thought everything about it was great, but the electronics weren't quite there yet. And I told Clyde from Bartolini, and I told Michael that, my bass has the hand-built American one has switchable between single coil and humbucker. For each pickup, there's a buffer that kind of matches the levels, and it's a tremendously versatile instrument. That said, honestly, 90% of the time, if not more, I'm running it in single coil mode, and so we all kind of decided, well, if that's the tone, let's do that with this. We don't need to try to make it do that. And so, but there's custom proprietary Bartolini electronics that are proprietary to this instrument, and it has the same EQ, mid-frequency EQ centers as the hand-built American one, and it plays amazingly, and it's about a quarter of the cost.
Yeah.
So I'm elated that any serious player can probably find a way to scrape together the money if they want to, and so it's attainable. It's certainly not pocket change, but it's attainable,
Yeah.
So it's slated to be shipping in late summer, and for anybody that's interested, by the way, it's they are taking pre-orders because people were wanting to reserve one from the initial shipment. And right now, I think about half of the initial shipment is already spoken for. So if anybody is interested, they can contact Rob Kelly at MTD and reserve one. Or I think, actually, speaking to Florida, Beaver Felton and crew at Bass Central, I think, are taking pre-orders too.
Okay. I've actually bought a bass from him years and years ago.
Yeah, they move a lot of MTDs.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this was actually an Ernie Ball like 20 years ago. I bought a fretless off of him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I've been there. I go there a lot since obviously they're just a 2-hour drive away.
Yeah, I've actually never been at the shop, but I've met Grasshopper and Beaver at the NAMM a bunch of times. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they always have a very good selection of stuff in there, definitely.
It seems like it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is the pickups on the Kingston the same as the American, or are they differ in some way?
They're totally different.
Okay.
But they achieve a similar thing for a lot less money.
Okay. Okay.
So
Because
it can get, by the way, I'm on the hook to do a video and kind of demonstrating the different tone options and things with it. I'm so busy this spring that I can't get to it until the summer, but there will be a video where I'll demonstrate the tones. But suffice it to say that it gets a great single coil slap tone. It can get the bridge Jaco thing, and it can get a really solid rock tone as well. So it's quite versatile. It isn't as versatile as the $8,000 one for sure. That's reality. But
yeah.
I don't think that they're really competing, because if somebody wants the ultimate, then, for sure, the American hand-built one it's a hand-built Michael Tobias bass,
Sure.
But for what this is, I think I'm actually going to be using it for some touring work, because, there's times that I just don't want to risk damaging my hand-built American one, so yeah. It's a great instrument.
Yeah, it's a beautiful instrument, and mine, even though mine's a tier down still, it's definitely my main player and the one I use all the time.
Yeah, I think the Kingston is, you know, I would pick the Kingston stuff any day over similarly priced other brands that are hanging on the wall at the
Oh,
local.
definitely.
You know,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's good stuff that they make. And so with how good this mine is, I can only imagine what your American one plays like, and I'm definitely anxious to see if I can get my hands on your Kingston version. I think that would be a lot of fun to check that out.
awesome. Yeah, if you get
Yeah,
one, and let me know what you think.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, as you're a Christian yourself, and so you play at church too. Is that correct?
I do. Yeah, pretty much
Okay.
every.
Okay, great. And so, tell us a little bit about, kind of what it's like playing on church versus, playing with Lincoln Brewster. I mean, kind of give us, I mean, obviously it's going to be just as rewarding playing for church, but, kind of tell us about your team and that you play with and kind of how things work.
Yeah. Well, you know, playing with Lincoln, we play a lot of churches, so it's
Yeah.
just tend to be kind of bigger churches maybe. But yeah, I think well, I serve at a couple of different churches here in South Orange County, so I'm usually at one or the other, twice a month, and both teams are great, and I do life with the people that I'm on the teams with, and yeah, you know to me, there's this sort of mentality that I don't play well. Yeah, I guess I kind of play, but I just play at church, and I absolutely don't subscribe to that philosophy or that perspective. To me, that's the highest calling, because
Hmm.
it has eternal significance, and you can't really say that about any gig, And I would say that when I play with Lincoln, I have the same perspective. We're just playing in different venues, and sometimes we're playing, arenas and things, but we're largely playing worship stuff that's just amplified and with some guitar solos.
Yeah.
So, a while back, I had an opportunity. One of the artists that I've been blessed to work with on my different albums is John Patitucci, and
Mm.
he's just such a great guy and a really strong believer in the whole thing. And I interviewed him for Christian Musician magazine years ago. I used to work for Christian Musician and or write for them, and I was asking him, a similar question, because he was kind of living a little bit north of New York City, and he'd play at his church, and then he'd go out and play with Wayne Shorter or Herbie Hancock or somebody, and I was saying, hey, so what's the difference? And he said, well, there's certainly, musically, there's stylistic differences, but John was saying that he doesn't really compartmentalize them that way. He was saying, hey, wherever I go play, I'm bringing everything that I am and who God's created me to be, and everything I play is intended to be a vertical statement. And I loved that. And I really, it's like, that is absolutely right on. I think that it's a human perspective to find the need to compartmentalize everything, but I don't think that that's really even biblical. I think that we're called to be light and salt, and when I'm whether I'm backing up whatever artist or I'm playing on a Sunday morning, I'm trying to make my music, what I'm playing, a vertical statement to God. And I think these artists that sometimes Christian musicians are playing, accompanying or backing up or whatever, they may not recognize where their gifts came from, but we know where their gifts came from, right?
Hmm.
I think there's lots of people that don't know where their gifts came from that I regard as highly gifted from God, and people like Jeff Beck, Lincoln Brewster and I both are, he's passed and it's a colossal bummer, but when he was around, we regularly marveled at what an amazing talent he was. And
Yeah.
I don't know if he ever did acknowledge where his gifts came from. But I think that he emerged from the womb with God-given talent to do what he did.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so if there was, I know we're kind of wrapping up here because I don't want to keep you too long. I said I would try to keep it at about an hour here for you.
All good.
But actually, if you got 1 minute
Yeah.
for a lightning round, or I guess I went to Chat GBT and I said, okay, what would be a funny or a interesting, unique question to ask bass player Norm Stockton? And I kind of got a list of them. 20 actually. I won't make you answer all those, but give me a number between 1 and 20, and I'll pull that off the list here and ask you.
Let's go with 12.
12. Okay. If your amp caught fire mid-show, what would you do? Finish the song first or immediately try to save your gear?
Is it my amp?
Yes.
Oh, well, see, I'm going to get very practical or pragmatic about this. I have a great relationship with my amp sponsor, and first of all, I know that my GK rig would never burn up. However, if it did, I would absolutely stop and get the heck away from it because I know that GK would take care of me.
Yeah, very good. Well, how about one more, 1 through 20?
I don't know. You pick one.
5.
Okay.
If groove was a crime and you were on trial for having too much of it, what would the prosecution use as evidence against you?
Wait. Say that again.
If groove was a crime and you were on trial for having too much of it, what would the prosecution use as evidence against you?
Well, they'd probably use the title of my last album and the focus of my instructional videos and what I've been telling people for the last 30 years or so. Yeah. I think in terms of if we're talking like musically, yeah, that's certainly been my goal to make groove oriented music. So they probably, I would like to think that they may play some of my music and say, here you're guilty. Hopefully.
Well, yeah, I think they would have a lot of evidence.
When they listen to the 3 albums and they go, you're exonerated.
Well, thanks for being a good sport on that. I won't keep you too much longer. What would be maybe some parting wisdom that you would give a up and coming bass player?
Well, is it a true statement that most of the people that are watching or listening to your podcast are players that are playing in a worship context?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So I'm going to actually talk to them.
Okay.
Which I'm one of you. I think that when we have been doing this a long time, it can be sometimes I guess maybe I'll just say it this way. You have to intentionally, deliberately make sure that you're not just phoning it in and that it's not just a gig. And I am regularly reminding myself of what a privilege it is to be involved in directing the eyes of the church to the Lord, and he has had so much grace on each of us. And I think tons of your listeners will each have their own story of how God was faithful in the midst of something where you didn't see a way out, and mm-hmm. I have many of those. And so I guess my encouragement and exhortation to you and to me is to remind yourself of that every time you're getting ready to play, and recognize what a privilege it is to be doing what we do, and give your best to God, and there are sometimes practical aspects of, uh, you know, sometimes there are practical considerations like, I'm playing with a drummer whose time is terrible, or I showed up, on time for the rehearsal and everybody else started trickling in a half hour later. There's frustrations because you're dealing with human beings and human beings, and but God sees, and be the one who's extending grace to people, be the one who's having the encouraging conversations, and be light and salt.
Yeah, good words. Hey, I really appreciate you joining us today, and I'm going to ask my listeners to pray for you and for continued blessings in your life. And it's just been a real privilege having you on, and I'm so excited to see what else you got coming down the pike. I'm sure you've got some new projects you're probably working on and things that are coming. So we'll definitely be keeping our eyes open for what you got.
I hugely appreciate that. Thank you so much. And great hanging out and chatting with you. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Norm. I appreciate it.
God bless you.
God bless you.